So first of all, in terms of a scintilla of evidence, to take Dickey's words there, Attorney Dickey, there's clearly evidentiary developments that have happened in the last couple of hours, also developments related to motive, Chris. Let's start with the notebook that you just mentioned. According to two people familiar with the investigation, they say there, in addition to this 3-page document Mangione had on his person, there was also a notebook. In that notebook, according to these sources, they say that there were outlined plans to attack a CEO at a conference, to use a gun doing so, and not to use explosives explicitly, because it would impact potentially innocent people. There was also this quote now. What do? You whack the CEO at the annual parasitic bean counter convention. It's targeted, precise, and doesn't risk innocence. That's the latest editorial on that. As for the evidentiary component of this, you mentioned the fingerprints at your lead-in here. We also have information from a senior law enforcement official who says that the fingerprints taken from Mangione after his detention there in Pennsylvania do match a set of fingerprints from the crime scene. What we don't know at this point is whether that comes from the Starbucks water bottle that was purchased, the police said was bought right before the shooting, whether it was the energy bars that were purchased and the wrappers that were discarded. We also know, Chris, that there was a cell phone that was found in an alleyway not far from where the shooting took place. Where the fingerprints are coming from, we do not know. But putting 2 + 2 together here, you now have fingerprints. You have the gun the police said bore a strong resemblance to the weapon that was used during the shooting that was also found on Mangione. You have a fake ID with the name Mark Rosario that was on his person, the same name, same ID that was used on that Upper West Side hostel. So a lot of the pieces here appear to be coming together.
Prosecution building a case, and to be fair, Catherine, the defense attorney, I'll repeat it, says, I haven't seen anything. I have not seen one scintilla, one speck, one drop of any evidence yet. He may not have seen it. Yes, so let's talk about discovery. Obviously, he's using very precise words there. Let's talk about discovery, when he might see some of this evidence.
When his client, first of all, the Manhattan DA's office, I'm sure, is very happy that he is in Pennsylvania. It gives them more time to build their case, to present a strong case to the grand jury. So when his client comes to New York.
So it actually works to, you think, the prosecutors in Manhattan's advantage?
Oh, yes, there's more time, because until he comes here and then is arraigned on what will probably be an indictment, nothing, like we call it, the clock doesn't start. You know, the timetables do not start. So this gives them enough time to build a case, also to defeat any psychiatric defense. Talking about methodical planning, that kind of shows that you kind of understood the nature and consequences of your actions, and you knew or that what you did was wrong, which is the standard that the defendant has to prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that he was insane at the time. So the manner that he allegedly committed this act will sort of mitigate against a psychiatric defense. And the Manhattan DA's office is looking at that now. Everything he did before the crime and everything after.
While the Manhattan investigators are building a murder case against him, what can his defense attorney do to build his own case in advance of getting that discovery information, to getting the evidence?
Well, if his client does not currently have a psychiatrist, which sort of mitigates against a psychiatric defense, get a psychiatrist. Do your own research into your client. Speak to, which is all going to be privileged, speak to his friends. Speak to, apparently there was a period where he was off the grid from friends. Why? So that's what the defense attorney, and this may not be, I don't know if this defense attorney is admitted to practice in New York. This may not be the defense attorney he ultimately will have. You should probably get a defense attorney who's familiar with New York practice.
All right. So, Casey, what do you make of what you've seen from this suspect so far? I mean, it got played over and over and over again when he was walking yesterday, and he tried to shout some things that seemed to be aimed against corporate America, perhaps named against insurance executives in particular. We don't know, but it does seem like he's trying to communicate his message to the public. Is that what you see as his priority now? What's your observation?
Well, I do see that he is trying to communicate with his public. And remember, he was on the lam for 4 days. So he is fully aware of the big conversation that's having about the insurance industry, which I believe was his mission in the first place. But that outburst as they were taking him in, you know, where he's aware that the cameras are on him, it was an impulsive act that was actually out of sync with his behavior so far, which was incredibly slow, well-planned, methodical. Remember, 10 days in New York before he did this act, surely planning it, doing a dry run, you know, getting the bicycle, deciding where he was going to put the backpack. So when we see that outburst, and that kind of insult, it's an insult to American intelligence. It's almost a plea for support from America, but it's also showing some mental health reflections that we haven't seen so far. So yeah, he seems calm, cold, calculating, but all of a sudden we see passion and anger. So it will be very interesting. I totally agree that we might see some mental health analyses in the near future, because I believe as this evidence mounts, and I do believe that the direct evidence, the forensic evidence will be overwhelming, a mental health plea of insanity, and New York uses guilty but mentally ill in the substantial capacity test, is probably about the only avenue his attorney's going to have.
So, Gary, what's next for Mangione in this effort to get him from Pennsylvania back to New York? How does this work?
Hey there, Chris. Yeah, Luigi Mangione is housed in this correctional facility behind me, and he may be here for a while. But just to be clear, he's going to be extradited to New York. It's just a matter of time. The judge laid out essentially two ways yesterday in the extradition hearing he could do this. Easy way, which would be waiving his extradition. He would have been probably already in New York by now. Or the hard way, which just seems like him and his lawyer are taking this way. And what the process looks like involves what's called a governor's warrant. So Governor Kathy Hochul of New York has to coordinate with officials here in Pennsylvania, send a warrant over here, and then there has to be a hearing where it's actually going to be an argumentative hearing where both sides are going to explain why he should or should not be extradited to New York, and then the judge will rule from there. His attorney spoke to reporters last night, and he told us that he's just simply testing the process. That's why he's fighting the extradition. Chris?
All right. Thank you so much for that. Catherine, there are officials who have expressed concern that he's become this kind of folk hero, particularly online, from the moment this happened almost. Now that Mangione is in custody, do you think that there will be people, particularly in the law enforcement community, who will want to limit his ability to communicate with the outside world? And can they?
And they could try. And it's odd that he would be a folk hero. This is not a single parent living from paycheck to paycheck with a sick kid. This is a rich kid from wealth and privilege. So his parents would be able to pay for any lack of insurance that he had. So this is not, to me, a role model for someone who's upset with the insurance. He has a life of wealth and privilege. So, and I'm sure if he's indicted, the Manhattan DA's office will stress that to make sure that the jury doesn't have any sympathy for someone who's wealth and privilege and say insurance companies are horrible.
Well, that brings us to motive, Sam. I mean, New York City investigators say they have been trying to establish if there's a clear link between an apparent back injury, and most of us have seen his social media where there is an X-ray of a spine with some screws in it, and obviously the killing of Brian Thompson. The NYPD chief of detectives was on Fox News Tuesday. Here's what he said.
It appears that at some point back in July 4th of 2023, he may have suffered some sort of back injury. He was posting an X-ray on his social media showing numerous screws being inserted into his spine. Some of the writings that he had, he was discussing the difficulty of sustaining that injury. So we're looking into whether or not the insurance industry either denied a claim from him or didn't help him out to the fullest extent.
Sam, what do we know about that connection?
So police so far, Chris, have not said definitively that he had this surgery. What we do know is that I had a conversation with R.J. Martin, who runs this co-living situation community out in Hawaii, where Mangione had lived for 6 months, according to Martin. He said that when he contacted Mangione 9 months ago, Mangione had sent him an X-ray. I don't know if it's explicitly that one, but there was one posted to social media that had 3-inch screws in it. He said it was just horrifying for him to even try to absorb that, and did know personally when he first spoke with Mangione, when he was interviewing to live there, that he had expressed back issues within the first week or two. He said that there was an introductory surf lesson, that it was so painful it triggered something physically in his body that Mangione was knocked off of his feet for days or longer. And this detail was really interesting, Chris, the idea that he had trouble sitting up straight, being outside, and having physical, intimate relationships with other people simply because of his anatomical back problems, right? That sort of paints a picture of potentially what could have been going on. No one knows inside of his mind at the time, but this was clearly something that was going on over a long period of time. And the chief of detectives, when he mentioned writings, I believe he is referring to the Reddit thread that we had confirmed overnight. That Reddit thread contains years of comments about the fact that he had trouble sleeping. He would wake up after 4 hours a night and then wake up another hour and a half after that, and again after that, simply because he was in so much pain from his back. He felt like there was a lot of narrative out there. You have to be over 40 years old to have some sort of surgical intervention, when in fact, clearly it's based on your body. And if your body's in pain, you need to do something. And he expressed the fact that he was in a lot of pain and said that this had affected sort of how he was thinking, his very essence.
Yeah, and his social interactions and all of that. Casey, we have been watching, and we were talking about this before, this wave of support for Mangione, right? Take a look at this merchandise. It's cropped up online supporting him, all these T-shirts and sweatshirts, free him. In addition, his attorney says his staff told him that people are offering to pay his clients' legal bills. Does this public response have an impact as lawyers on both sides build their case, or an impact potentially on a potential jury?
I hope it doesn't have an impact on a potential jury. And, you know, the voir dire process really does need to weed out anybody who considers him a folk hero. You know, he in his manifesto, his little 3-page note that they got from his backpack, he does talk about the fact that the United States, and he's very bright, he's done his research, you know, we're #1 in healthcare costs to our consumers, but apparently number 42 in the world in terms of life expectancy. And we do need to be very cautious, because clearly this conversation needs to be happening. That is why the public is rising up and having a lot of opinions about their own personal experiences with insurance companies. But I have to remind everyone, there is no proof he has had an issue with an insurance company. This could just be his cause celeb of the moment, because he wants to be famous. And he pictures himself, I think, as a savior, as a folk hero for the people. He's a superhero like Batman, you know, going to conquer evil and seek good. And that really points to some real mental health issues. Why it was, you know, almost all of these shooters have some mission that they are on to raise the consciousness of America towards their, you know, the subject of their grudge, whether it's their employer or the cost of health care, you know, the IRS, you know, Joseph Stack flew his plane into a building with a 5-page manifesto. We have to just take it with a grain of salt and not be laughing about it or making light of it. Do not forget that a man died over this and that he has a family and children, and they're watching too.